ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to this session this afternoon. And I hope that you, at the end of this session, you've got a better understanding of what baking is about, and in particular these two books. One is Baking in Asia and one is Baking for Non-Bakers. They're two separate books. Baking in Asia book talks about my experiences in Asia, in Singapore region, for the last 28 years. And the last one, Baking for Non-Bakers, came out of a program I worked with at the Helping Hand up in Serangoon Road. There's a halfway house there, and I was asked if I would help them set up a bakery from the church that I belong to in Singapore. And I went to suppliers and I got equipment and we set up a bakery there. And then the impetus for writing this came out of, as I was trying to give a lecture to the residents. They didn't understand what flour was, didn't have any idea. So I thought, I've got to make it simpler, and this is how that came. So hopefully you'll get the message of that as we go through these slides. Mike Fleming is my name, and I've been watching TV lately, and people are running courses of how to speak, and you shouldn't greet people and say who you are or how are you. I don't know. I've done that, so that's who I am. I've been in this business for 65 years as a baker, as a pastry cook in the baking industry, and I've been in Singapore since 1993. And I'm going to share some of my experiences with there as we go on here.
They understand English. Okay. That's the reason I'm very happy. You can carry on unless something that
okay.
Maybe
All right. Well, so we're going to start off with my first experience with Chinese. Way back in about 1989, 1990, in a college that I was working at in Sydney, the Burns Phil is a shipping company in Sydney in the Pacific, Southeast Asia Pacific, were the agents for the Minhua cruise ship, Chinese cruise ship called the Minhua, and they were having lots of tours out to Japan, to Fiji, New Caledonia, Vanuatu, and all around the Pacific. So it was about a 10-day cruise, and they would come back. And they were at the college that I was working at the time, and they came into the bakery kitchen and said, "Oh, we need somebody perhaps to come and work on this ship to help us improve our afternoon tea. Because we're just using biscuits now, we should be using cakes." So I said, "Okay, that sounds like a good idea for me." I always wanted to work on a ship. That was one of my ambitions. I left Australia in 1967 and went to United Kingdom in London, and I went there with the objective to work on ships. But I didn't get any ship work, a lot of unemployment there at the time. So this was the closest thing to it. So on the So the baking journey beyond Asia. This is my first experience with Chinese culture, and this fellow here is the head chef, and these are the two pastry bakers in the pastry kitchen. And the chef used to come up to the galley every morning at 11:30 and bring me a can of Chinese beer and a bowl of soup each morning that I was on the cruise. And I was there for 2 cruises. I went the first cruise I went with my family, and the second I went a few weeks later by myself. And after we finished the first cruise, I said to one of the fellows on board, who's an Australian guy, I said, "Do you think will they follow what I taught them when I was here?" And he said, "Well, when you come back in 2 weeks' time, if they're still doing what you showed them, then they must have said it was okay." So 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, I went back again, and they were using the ideas that I'd given to them, and we improved our sales of afternoon tea fancies to about 30 dozen of it every day, and we did not anything perfectly, but we did some very good stuff. And these are the pastry people I work with, and these are the fellas in the bread section. There's the bread bakery, and the bread bread section there. And they were hard workers, and I realised I didn't really miss much of not working on a ship because it's hard work, hot, rough weather, whatever weather you've got to work on the ship. It's not very nice at all. So that was my first experience with the Chinese culture. And at the same time, I was doing a diploma in teaching at university because I went and joined TAFE College. Am I speaking too quickly? And you and
Yeah, the audience.
no, well, they can't understand. Can you follow me? So, okay, so I okay. One of my lecturer in my cohort in the university was a Labor supporter. It's a political supporter in Australia, and Australia had just recognised China, and Australia was one of the first companies apart from America to do so. And I had an essay. I had to write an essay on China. I wrote an essay on China, and I got a high distinction. And I was amazed at the high distinction because I never got any of that at school. And that sort of made me more interested in the Chinese culture. And then what happened was, a friend of mine in Sydney came to me and asked me, would I be interested to help a local Chinese guy who immigrated to Australia who wants to set up a bakery in Suzhou and Wuxi. And he would take all the equipment up there, and you will train the people. And we're not going to. It's not a paid job, but it's an experience. I said, well, okay, it was in my school holiday times, which was 6 weeks holiday at Christmas time. So I went to China. I went to mainland China, and we set up this fellow set up a bakery in Suzhou, in an old factory, in a very old part of Suzhou. And we made pastries and we made cakes, and we had a lot of interesting times together. And they had another outlet in Suzhou, in Wuxi. Wuxi was about a mile up the road. So we would do work in Suzhou, and the next day we'd get in a car and go up to Wuxi. And in Wuxi they rented a space in an old restaurant, and it was renovated in the restaurant. They renovated that, and so we set up bakeries in both of those areas. And this is just a picture of Suzhou at the time. Suzhou was a 2,500 years old city on the Silk Road to China, and it was not modernised in those days. This is just before Singapore went to Suzhou and built the Suzhou town working thing. I was there just before that, or around about the same time.
Also told you.
Yeah, Suzhou there. So this fellow wanted to set up a Western bakery in Suzhou, and my job was to try to train these people into making stuff. But I was given instructions. Like, I don't have. You can pick the people. I don't have you and you. I don't talk to you about the same thing at the same time. I said, why not? He said, well, I don't want you or you to know everything there is because you might go up and start a bakery. So I said, well, look, my approach, the Western approach is I want to show you how to make a loaf of bread. I need to show you how to make a loaf of bread. You're going to have to make the loaf of bread, and you're going to have to have a lot of practice to make the loaf of bread. Right? So we were some of the loggerheads there at times, but this factory had one tap, and it was not inside the workshop. It was outside, and at certain times during the year, one morning I went up there, we didn't have any water because it had been freezing overnight, and the water had frozen, so we couldn't do anything because we couldn't get any water. And we had different fats. We bought all the equipment we bought from Australia, took it up by container load, ovens, mixers, and various things like that. And we set it up in the bakery, and we hadn't set it up very long, and then the ovens broke down, and there was something wrong with the way it had been wired up. The switches were not correct, and so we're thinking, oh, maybe you got to go back to Australia to get somebody to fly us up. And on my way to walking to the bakery every morning, I went past the General Electric factory. So I said to the fellow, look, down the street there's the General Electric. Why don't you go down and ask the man there they might have somebody in there who can help you. Sure enough, they went and saw him, and then became the official. He was the official electrician for the company, and we solved our problem. But trying to do things in the bakery in Suzhou and Mushi was very difficult. There was no hot water. One day I needed hot water to do something, and it took forever to get the hot water. And they came back with a thermos flask of hot water. And I thought, they came back with thermos flasks of hot water because they don't have any hot water system. So had we known that, we could have put a hot water service in here to do that. But so it was little things like that you have to understand. We were using bakery fats, local bakery fats made in Shanghai from companies that would make a similar type product we had in Australia. But some of those products, like butter, have got to be at a certain temperature for it to use properly. But overnight, the temperature in this bakery would go down to 0. So the fat sitting on the floor would be like a brick. So that's where I got the idea that I'd use hot water to melt it down here, and I would get it to do something. And then one of the workers said to me, "Why don't we put the butter in the proving box?" There was a proving room, a hot room. So we said, if we put the butter in here, it'll soften down overnight. When we come in the morning, we can use it. And I didn't think of that. I said, that's a good idea. So we did that, but they wanted it to proof the bread, so then we had to take the butter out and stick it in the bakery. And when we got to go to use that later on in the day, it'd gone back to hardness. Right? So we had to overcome those sort of problems.
It's a winter time, is it?
This was in January to December, January
So
in Shanghai. And up in Mushi, he said to me, "Oh, I'll put a heater in the room where the fat is, and I thought, oh, that's good." He said, "But we're going to have to turn it off at night time." So what's the point of putting a heater on, turn it off at night time? Because in the early hours of the morning, it gets very cold. Anyway, so we did what we could do there. And one particular day, I'm showing the students what to do there, and one of the students leaned up against the windowsill and pushed his hand on the windowsill, and we're 3 stories up, and this thing fell out, smashed to the floor, and I went ballistic because cold air will come in, and they laughed because it was funny. So we have to learn to do other things, and we'll show you a photograph in a minute now where in some of the places the inside temperature was 4 degrees Celsius as the working conditions, not 26 or 16, but 4 degrees Celsius. So that was around Suzhou. And these are the workers, and we had big long tables, and I was given instructions, particularly this fella here. I don't know what he was smarter than a lot of the others, and there was a girl. She's not in that photo. And I was not to have both of those together teach them the same thing at the same time. I had to do it separately.
It's like,
so
师傅要留一点.
So that they didn't take their secrets away. And this is a photograph of the student that we try to inculcate hygiene and all that sort of stuff in the bakery. So they had uniforms, but they would come in shirt and tie, and I've never seen this, but they would have cards on their hands then there'd be elastic here, and so they didn't get their shirts dirty and stuff like that.
The China, there's elastic.
Yes. So it was interesting stuff like that they had all the time. And in Mushi was my first Chinese New Year. That was in January of 1993. And this is this man's house. This fellow here is the Peter Zhu. He's the Singapore bloke who lived. The Chinese man lived in Sydney near me. And I went with him. But this is having a dinner, a Chinese New Year dinner. And the only thing we took off in that room was our gloves. We didn't take any jackets off because it was freezing cold. in that part of China, there's no heat. In the winter time, you have to be Beijing. At Beijing, they had heating, but down in Suzhou, they didn't have any heating at all. So we drank a lot of mantou, I think it's called there. We had frog's legs, we had all sorts of stuff there. And I was given the privilege to come to this man's house. And I think there were not too many there weren't too many Caucasians who would have gone to China and celebrated a reunion dinner in a local Chinese house. It's not normally it would be done. So I got to see a lot of interesting things there. Also, I got to see also a lot of politics. There's a lot of politics between different departments, and eventually this man got stabbed in the back, and they took the business of him in Shanghai, and they left him with the one in Wuxi, and then they got rid of him in there. And that's internal politics is in there. That was the 1st of January 23. Now, at this particular time when I went to China, before I went to China, I got the opportunity for a job in Singapore. This I finished this. This is in a Suzhou town on the banks of the river. This is a man doing Chinese characters with boiled sugar, and the kids come along and take all of that. I've never seen it, and it reminds me there was a lady in Holland Village. In Holland Village, near Lims, she used to sit on the stand there, and she had a boiled sugar, and she would make toffees as well. Yeah, I've not seen it. So they're boiled sweets. So, I mean, I did most of my time working around there. Okay. This is an example. This is in Wuxi, and I call this a Michelin tire man. I've got 2 pairs of pants, I've got long johns and 2 pair of trousers. I've got a jumper and a puffer jacket and a chef jacket. So, I mean, you can see, because it's so cold in here. And to make this is a buttercream. To make this buttercream, we have to melt half of the butter, melt it, and then put it in a mixing bowl with a softened butter and aerate it to make a buttercream. To make the cake for the official opening of the place. And as quickly as I would pipe it on the side of this 8-story cake, it would harden because the internal temperature was so cold. But as I just said, in the meantime, before I got there, before I left Sydney in November, I got a call in college. I'd been in Hobart as a bakery conference. I stayed in a bakery over the weekend, and I got a phone call, and somebody said to me, "There's a job in the Sydney Morning Herald. Did you see it?" I said, "No, I've not been home. I've been in Tasmania." He said, "Well, they're looking for somebody to set up a school in Singapore, and I thought of you because I couldn't do it. I didn't have the qualifications." And just as I was speaking to that man, I got a message. Somebody put me a message, phone this person. So I phoned that person, and there was another man ringing me to say there was a job in the paper for you there. So that was a job to come up to Singapore and set up the IGC. So I heard about it on Monday. The following Monday, I sent my resume to Melbourne, to the Australian Wheat Board. On Wednesday, they asked me to come down for an interview. I flew down to Melbourne for an interview, and I came back home. On Friday morning, they rang me in Sydney and said, "You are our preferred candidate. Can you stop off in Singapore on your way to China?" I said, "Yeah, sure, I can." So all this, as I was getting prepared for this Chinese experience, this other thing came along. So I came up to Singapore, stopped overnight here in Singapore, and met a cream of people at the flour mill at Keppel Road, and had a chat to them. And then I went off to China, and I said I can come back at the end of my China trip. I came back here in the end of January, early February, and then I had a couple more days here. We finalised the deal, and I came back on the 1st of March and started work with them. But this is there's a video here. I don't know if we can see. This is a video, official video for the opening of the Chinese.
This week. So this is forward. This is forward already. Yeah, backward. Just straight.
I can't see it. We should be there.
威尔士食品有限公司一份聂伟平专程来苏表示祝贺。苏州威尔士食品有限公司是由澳大利亚唯友贸易有限公司和苏州一品香食品厂合资兴建的，主要生产饼干、蛋糕、面包、小点心等5大系列西式点心及各类精美食品。公司聘请澳大利亚西点专家马克·弗莱明·克拉克为技术顾问，生产的产品由苏州食品商场食品2店彩虹食品经营店经销。这是本台报道的。
That was just a video that was showed on the TV. And one of the interesting things about one of the interesting things about Suzhou was I learned for entertainment we used to go dancing. A lot of Chinese people dance in the streets, and we would go to the local community centre and we would drink tea that I would fill up all night, and I learned to dance. I could dance reasonably okay. And these Chinese ladies were very good dancers, and we would spend our entertainment just dancing and karaoke singing and that sort of stuff. So that's what that was. So then I came up to Singapore, and I was the principal master trainer of the Singapore and the Prima National Productivity Board of Singapore and Prima got together, and they were given $3 million, and they set up a bakery school in the flour mill on Keppel Road. And I started there on 1st of March 1993. I arrived here, I left at the end of February. I flew up. In the morning, when I came into Singapore, I picked up the wrong bag, and I bought it. I was staying at the Riverview Hotel.
Yes.
Down
And a cup of tea.
Yeah, down there. And I got up in the morning and I opened this bag and I was looking for some clothes, and I suddenly realised this is not my bag. So I had to get in the taxi, race all back to the airport, and swap over the right bag and that sort of stuff, and ready for the man to come and pick me up at 9 o'clock to go to work. So this exercise was a National Productivity Board in those days had given Prima $3 million to develop a bakery school for the local community, and it was it's the first of its type in Asia, professional bakery school in Asia, and Prima provided the facility and a lot of the equipment, and I sort of I was the man who was to set it all up and do all that sort of stuff, which I did for the next 5 years. And this is what we built. So this is on the 11th floor of the Prima, where the Prima revolving tower used to be. It's still down. Well, there's not a revolving tower anymore. That mill is going to close down, and that'll be knocked down, and the mill is going to go to Twas, and they're building a new mill down there. But this was the ITC layout. There were two big pastry workshops, ovens down the middle. We had an Asian pastry noodle making workshop, and chocolate making workshop over here, and then we had 2 lecture rooms, an office, and a conference room store. And we were turning over eventually something close to $1 million a year in part-time classes and full-time classes when this business got up and running. That's quite a big building area there. The noodle workshop, we ran a noodle workshop for the Singapore noodle manufacturers. Don't have any qualifications, so part of the deal was that we get noodle machines in there. We run a course and we give them qualifications. So that was the same. Asian pastry, we had a lady who wrote a dim sum course, and we used to do hakao, shumai, all that sort of stuff, and that sort of thing. So this was the building. There was closed circuit TV through this building, but the unfortunate part about it was, this was when I arrived on the 1st of March of 1993. This is the staff. Emma is a local Singaporean lady, and SK Wong is Singaporean. All the other guys, apart from myself, are mainland Chinese. And this man here, Mr. Gan, he's still in Singapore now. Mr. Gan has some experience at the American Institute of Baking, did baking courses. But these other two were fishermen or whatever, had no idea what they were doing. Yet the management told me that they were right in the curriculum. So I thought, okay. So I had to sort of do the double take.
Just to, Mike.
Yep.
So this white shirt, gentleman, and the other shirt, and they are all from mainland China.
They're mainland China, yeah.
So they are from fisherman background.
Well, they were. I think they were. They weren't in the food business. These two weren't in the food. This man was in a biscuit factory in China.
Ah, okay. So from there, the other one would be upon to run
Well, they
training
were
curriculum.
my staff here, and they were the staff. Now the big problem was, how do I find out what their skills are? And Prima is an interesting company. They're very protective of what they do, and anyone who comes out, an outsider, perhaps a white man, comes in there and asks questions, they're not very conducive to give you answers. So I was looking for a kitchen that I could make some products in, so as I could have a look and see what these people can do. And it took months to get the approval to go and use a test bakery kitchen where the Prima Deli people were, to come in there. And one night we went down there and we made cakes and bread and that sort of stuff. And then I went back home that night. I used to live very close to the Prima address up in Lower Delta Road. I went back home and there was a man staying with me from the Australian Wheat Board, and I said to him, Graham, I said, these blokes down there, they don't know what they're doing. And this is March, April. So quickly I had to go and find qualified staff. It wasn't easy to find staff because these men didn't know any English, and they didn't know any baking as well. They had very few baking skills. Mr. Garn was better, and he used to be a translator for us as well. SK Wong, or KSY, he's passed away now, but he was a bread baker and he was quite competent in what he did. He was okay, but they were the constraints. So I had to build this school with these sort of people, write curriculum, train staff, get equipment, organise where stuff needs to go. All of that sort of stuff was under my supervision, and we got it done. And sometimes the Prima people would say to me, I can't believe we got this done. I came in March, we opened the classes in June. And in September, we had an official opening. This is Lim Bern Heng. We're coming to the official, that's Prima's Ching. This is the general manager of Prima, Mr. Howe. No, this is the boss of Prima, son of this, and this one's the general manager. And Tony Locke was one of the officers there. Lim Bern Heng came, and that was in September, the 21st September. The next day, we had 500 telephone calls at least every day for the next week. People want to know how they come and do a course. So quickly, as a result of that, I developed 4 baking principles program, one for bread, one for cake, one for pastry, and one for sugar craft. They were four lessons, four lessons, one lesson a week, and our first customers was CDAC. CDAC came, and we touched base with CDAC, and they sort of would send students would come and enroll, and a lot of the CDAC courses are subsidised, yet people would come to the course driving Mercedes-Benz and BMWs and all this or something. How do they qualify to go and get this cheap? My introduction to Singapore. How do they qualify? So CDA, we had CDAC students, and then we had Mendaki students, and then we got Cinder students. So a lot of these self-help groups in Singapore, they came and did these courses. And we were doing these short courses 7 days a week, 5 nights a week, eventually. That's the demand was there for that. And 1 year we nearly got $1 million, as I said, $1 million in turnover in sales, which is quite unique. And that was the result of that there. This is on the first day, the official opening of the a lot of these people are, some of these people are still in industry, some have passed away now. But some of our students, well, out of our students, Sidel, the lady that set up the Sidel Bakery, Mrs. Cheng, she was a student of ours back at BITC days. And there's been many students have come and start up bakeries as well. So that's what we set up in there, and we had closed circuit television, and I used, because I come from Australia, I thought closed circuit TV was invasive of people's privacy. You were spying on them. But I could watch in my office what went on down there. And I was watching one day, and I watched Mr. Garn, fell on the ground, standing to lecture, and he was standing stiff as a board, and I thought, this is not good enough. So as a result of the closed circuit TV, I then met some people at Singapore Polytechnic, and they came and did some training programs for the staff to get them to relax a little bit, to don't be so stiff and that sort of stuff. So there was a whole lot of things we had to do in this course, and it took my time 7 days a week to do that. And then I went away in 2007 to Nepal, to Annapurna. I went trekking in the Annapurna Conservation Track, 11 days trekking with a friend of mine. And I came back and I realised that I need to leave, I need to change, because I'd had 5 years already, and I needed to, everything had to come from me. And that became quite difficult at the time. What sort of screw you need, what sort of paint you need. I have an opinion, but I don't need to know where it is. So I decided to leave, and I got a colleague from Australia in Tasmania who came and took my place, and he became the principal, and that business went on for 25 years. It went on for 25 years before Prima sold it to a local man in Singapore at Bukit Merah, and it's now at the BITC is some courses down there. So I was pleased to know that what I built and the stuff that I put in place lasted 25 years. So, and that comes back to a lot of things I do in baking. But I don't actually do this in my everyday life, my wife tells me. Big emphasis on the basic. You must have basic skills. You must have basic fundamentals. If you've got basic fundamentals, you can do anything, right? And the fact that lasted 25 years was okay. So at the end of 5 years, I decided I was to go. I didn't want to go back to Australia. There was nothing like a family back then, 2 daughters and brothers and sisters and whatnot. But there was no work there like I was doing in Singapore. I did, in 5 years in Singapore, I made 6 video tapes of bread, cakes, pastries. I did more in 5 years than I'd done in 15 years in the tape system in Australia, because in Singapore I had the final say. When I was in Australia, I wasn't at the top. I was second or third run, and I had to satisfy somebody else's ego. So we got to do things pretty well. So I left there, and from March 1998 to 2018, I worked in a company called Surotech Private Limited. Now, Ceratech is a food ingredient technology company. In other words, what they do is they make small micro ingredients that bakers use to make breads, mainly industrial bakeries. Sunshine, Gardenia, a large big manufacturers. The people that make McDonald's buns, they provide the technology, ingredient technology for the McDonald's buns. And we started McDonald's course in 2002. It ran till 2018, and that's 10 years or 12 years. Every year, once a year, initially twice a year, and then once a year people from the Asia Pacific would come to Singapore to our facility up in Woodlands, and we would do a bakery course on focusing on the quality aspects of McDonald's hamburger buns. A lot of people badmouth McDonald's, that they're rubbish food, etc., etc., but you cannot question their quality assurance program. They are the most stringent quality assurance program of any of these food companies around. So I went to work for Ceratech as a technical and training portfolio. And I was able to go to Indonesia, Vietnam, Myanmar, Australia, Philippines, Middle East, all over in this world. And I've recalled or recounted in this baking in Asia the various companies when I worked for Sara Lee, when I worked for the United States Data Board, and I worked for Californian Raisins and that sort of stuff. They were doing research and development programs for those, and at the same time we were trying to train people in how to make bread, cakes and pastries. So that was the technical training. The bakery training with Sunshine Bakeries, AOB International, which was the American Institute of Baking. It's no longer in operation anymore. It's now, it used to have a big school in Manhattan, Kansas, which I've been over there a couple of times. They don't do that anymore. They operate satellites. But we ran management programs for bakeries in Batam and Bintan with AOB International. With KDU, University College in Malaysia, we used to run a bakery science program for people up there. Malaysia, the people who make Arista, that's the company that makes McDonald's buns in Malaysia and Singapore. We ran programs for those, and we did programs for them as well. And then we also took our McDonald's program to China, to the Middle East, to Jordan, to train people in the aspects of making McDonald's buns. And at the same time, then we set up a bakery school. In 2008, I established another bakery school, which we focused on WSQ programs. We were running programs before then, and people used to come and do tutorial. People would enroll in AIB correspondence courses and come down, and we would run a weekend tutorial every month on various topics. So then we decided we would set up another school, and at this time, then the WSQ program started. So we converted what I already had programs running, and we converted those into WSQ programs, and we started WSQ programs until 2019, and we sold it off to BITC. And then we named it Ceratech School of Baking Technology 2010-2018. We did diploma courses, we did certificate programs, and we did anything and everything we wanted to do. And how we were different, and I was just talking to this gentleman before, we were different in that you came to see us and you were at a school where you had people with technical knowledge of how to make bread and cake and pastry. A lot of places still in Singapore, the people who's instructor have got very little technical knowledge, very little experience. They might have done a course somewhere, and then they turn around and become an instructor. My background training was 5-year apprenticeship, at least 10 years in an industry, a business for 10 years before I went into teaching. So I brought with me a lot of industrial training, a lot of technical stuff, and we put those into the courses that we did at the same time.
Just translate.
Sorry. But the WSQ programs were a good idea until the Skills Future started. I think. And when the Skills Future started, that bastardised all of the programs. When the WHQ module started, I was at a meeting at an education place down in Grange Road, on the corner of Grange Road, near Great World City. There's a registered education place on the corner there, Patterson Road and Grange Road. And the man from the ministry got stuck into all of the people who were running schools, loud mouth, and etc., etc. But then eventually, when Skills Future came along, they changed tack. Anyone could run these courses. And what about the standards? Well, no, it's up to the learner to understand what the standards are. And that, to me, was the beginning of the end of that. So we got out of that in the end, because the students who came to us only just wanted to make some cakes and bread, take home and eat. They didn't want to wash. They didn't want to wash up. They didn't want to sweep up the floor. They didn't want to do all the sort of things that you're going to do if you're going to be a baker. And it became a hobby farm, so much so that if there were 30 cakes made and there were 10 people, that's 3 cakes each, right? Now, when it came to divide up the spoils, there was only 25. Where's the other 5? And there would be lots of arguments. You know, you take it and I took it. And it was really, really bad. Really, really bad. Okay, these are some of the programs that we ran here, and in here, there's a detailed section there on US potato board, and we did a research and development for US potato board on how to use a particular type of dehydrated potato in toast bread, and what could it improve the softness and the shelf life of the product. So there was 6 different types of dehydrated potato, and we ran tests on those 6 types, got those down to 2, and we did baking tests on the 2, and we picked 1, and we did sensory evaluations on that, and we ran seminar courses in Singapore and Malaysia, in Thailand, in China, and everyone's excited about how to use this product. And then when they would say to the US potato people, well, where can we buy the product? Well, we don't have any product. To use the product, you've got to buy a container load. Now, if you're a small baker and you want to do a test bake, you don't want a 60-foot container or a 40-foot container. You need a few kilos of it. Right? So they spent a lot of money, and it proved it was right, but it didn't take off. And there's Sarah Lee was another one of the people that we did work in here. Sarah Lee set up a bakery in Cikarang in Jakarta, near Bekasi. It was the first or their only fresh bakery in outside of America and Australia. Sarah Lee had a bakery in Sydney, in Melbourne, in New South Wales, in Sydney, on the Central Coast. And the idea was they made filled buns here with kaya and chocolate filling, custard filling, and they would go down to the Warren shop, bicycle people, and they would sell all this stuff around. So they started this school, this factory down there, and I just left. I just joined Surotech at that time. And at the same time they opened their business, the first financial crisis hit Indonesia, and the rupiah went from, 800 to 1,000 or 1,200 rupiah to the dollar, what it may be. The prices blew out. So what Sarah Lee did is they started to cut the fillings that they put in the product. And as soon as they started to cut the fillings, the quality of the product finished and the sales fell off, and they never recovered. Sari Roti, which is one of the biggest bun makers in Indonesia, they do it all by hand. Sarah Lee were doing it all by machine. But that was an interesting exercise. I would go down to Cikarang, and that would be a problem. I would be there one week and we'd make something and everyone's happy with it. You go back the next week, not the same. And then you have to investigate what it was. And what it was the production manager didn't like goods with a high crust colour. A lot of Asians don't like bread with too much brown colour. They like a very pale colour. And now the Indonesians are much the same. So this fellow used to bake the product at lower temperatures, and it would stale quicker. So then we were just troubleshooting every time, and eventually that business went broke. But all of the different, and then in Myanmar, I had the opportunity to go to Myanmar in 1998, first time to Yangon, and went to Yangon and to Mandalay, and that was an interesting exercise. I've never seen cake making quantity-wise like I saw in Yangon. In Yangon, there's people making pound cake in slices, and they would flow wrap. And at a particular time of year, when it's the festival time, they make thousands and thousands of these cakes. Cakes is twice as big as this. I've never seen cake like it. Another place made Swiss rolls, and they used to make thousands and thousands of Swiss rolls. I've never seen anything like that in Australia. And the man who was doing these businesses was a company called the Red Prawn. It's Super Zoo, and its logo was a red prawn. He had 400 employees in this factory, and it was a factory with dirt floor, and he was making all these products. And then he had a special Western section where he had the latest equipment, flow wrapping machines, and that sort of stuff. And this man was very, very busy, very successful. And I went back about 10 years ago, and that town, his factory was way out in the boondocks. Now it's all part of Yangon, and he's got a modern facility. So a lot of the experiences of exercises that I did up in Asia are spoken about in this book here. The last one I did was in Myanmar. I nearly got electrocuted. I was in Myanmar doing some trials at a flour mill, and we were using potato flour, instant potato in the dough, and we made the dough and put one set of dough was in the fridge, in the prover, ready to go into the oven, and so when it was ready, they put it into the oven, and then they put the next tray in the proof box, and I wanted to see how it was. So I opened the proof box, I reached in and touched the tray, and all of a sudden I was shaking like that. I got electrocuted, right? And I quickly let it go because there was a short circuit somewhere. I said, "Hey, I've really got electrocuted." Oh, and they said, "Oh, sometimes that happens here." Right? So that's the closest. That's the most scary thing I've done. But in Myanmar, also an interesting points were I went to a place called the Lucky Biscuit Company. Lucky Biscuit Company was a factory on the banks of the Irrawaddy River, and it was like something out of Charles Dickens. It was a dark room, and there was old ovens inside there, and there was a lot of young kids in there working away. And of course, a lot of Westerners think that's child exploitation, labour, etc. But I quickly realised that if they're not doing that, they've got no other job. So they're really not doing that because they're forced to. They're doing that to survive. So in that particular environment, I had to go inside. I had to go outside and write I couldn't see daylight. I couldn't write notes in the factory because it was so dark. So we went out of there. And then in Mandalay, which was a plane ride from Yangon, about an hour's plane ride, there was a bakery up there who had 200 outlets. Mr. Dumbo Bakery. He had 200 outlets in and around Mandalay. And he had a central bakery, and he weighed every single ingredient for every single product. He didn't let anybody, so if you're making the bread, he would come give you the ingredients, you're going to make the bread. You would never know what was in the bread, you would never know what the ingredients were. He did that all by himself. And the last time I was there, he was modernising, putting new equipment in there. But I think that business is not in business anymore. But that reminds me of a local Singapore company here, family-owned company, that they used to control the spices they used in their fillings. And one lady would weigh, one of the sisters in the company would weigh up all the spices for the curry puff, and she would give it to the bakers when they made the curry puff. nobody knew what the recipe was except his lady. Now, I think she passed it down on her son, and they're still in business now. But that's often how the secret is. And a lot of those things are, I try to explain some of those idiosyncrasies in there. And the book is not only a story, but it's also a travelogue. I mean, I got to see places like I've never seen before, like Mandalay, Yangon, and in the Philippines, in Jakarta, Indonesia, and those sort of stuff. I'd never been any of those places before, and baking has been able to do that to me. So this is what we did. So you'll find that information in those books there. This is an extract from McDonald's hamburger. These are McDonald's muffins, English muffins. Now, the key of a good muffin is porosity. You need the more holes the better. You don't want to make hockey pucks. When these are not too bad. A lot of them look, you know what a hockey puck is? Ice hockey. An ice hockey, a puck, which is the ball, looks like this, but it's very flat. And in the McDonald's program that we used to run in Surotech, when the participants would come up to Surotech, they would have to bring in some Big Macs, regular, quarter pounders, English muffins, examples of their product that would come up from every country. And in the first lesson, we would put them all out, put their names down, and we would score the buns, score them. Right, so you know, Malaysia, you could see what Singapore was doing. Korea, we were the better bakers. Korean, we could see the Korean products they sell. So they're very keen on quality control. So to get this dough here is about 98% water. Right, very, very soft dough, very, very soft dough, and it's not handled by hand. It goes through a muffin coat type thing, and when it goes onto the griller, it gets the more holes the better, and that's the quality attribute of that. And we used to get this result, handmade ones in our test bakery. I was able to get something like that, not perfectly, but I was quite happy with what we got. All right, so more information on this one here. And at the back of this book, just by way of interest, there's a list of all the different places I've worked for, etc., and the various things we did in there. But we now move on to this one here, baking for non-bakers. The baking for non-bakers was I was writing this course. I'd written a course beforehand, and I was going to publish a book, and it was called a different name. And what I do was I write text, and I send a text to a friend of mine in Australia who's not a baker, but he corrects me for grammar and punctuation, etc. And then we have I give him understanding. He sends it back to me, and that's how that's how we did that. But I was asked after I left Syria, when I retired, which is after COVID, I was asked by IBC, International Baptist Church, that I go to, with the men's ministry. They asked me if I could help them set up a bakery in the Helping Hand up in Serangoon Road. And I said, yeah, okay. I got nothing else to do, why not? So I went up there and I set up a bakery up there, and I got equipment supplied by Mockley, a local equipment company here, gave me a mixer and an oven, and we had benches there, and we started. And then as I'm teaching these people, I started to give them some theory lessons. And I did one theory lesson, and I quickly realised that they didn't understand a word I was saying. Not only because maybe an accent, they didn't understand my accent, but I had no idea what flour was, what sugar was, or anything of that nature. So I came up with the idea of I need to simplify this so as they can easily understand. And then I realised, well, there's not only these people up in Helping Hand who understand this, there were many other people as well. And so that's how this came about, baking for non-bakers. And in the Bacon on Bakers, there are 3 sections in there. You'll see there's a section on ingredients. What do you need to, if you're going to make bread or you're going to use flour, what sort of flour do you need to make? What sort of sugar do you need? If you're going to use butter, what sort of butter do you use? If you use margarines, what sort of margarines do you use? And can you use margarine and butter together? Yes, you can. That's the choice you make. Different prices. What creams are? What is cream? What's fresh cream? What's dairy cream? What's whipping cream? What's long life cream? What's the cream that the local Singapore bakers use here is a non-dairy cream, oil-based. It's not made from a cow milk. Whereas if you want a cake that's made with fresh cream, you go 4 Leaves. 4 Leaves, they use fresh cream in all their cakes, and chartreuse, they use Hokkaido fresh cream. So what I've tried to do here is give people an understanding of, in milk there's skim milk, whole milk, there's milk powder, there's full cream milk powder, there's non-fat milk powder. What's the difference? How do you use it? If you're going to make bread, do you use liquid milk, UHT milk, or whatever, right? Or do you use, if you're going to make bread commercially, if you're going to use milk powder, you need to use a high heat treated milk powder, because the protein of milk interferes with the protein of flour when it's developed, unless it's been denatured. So all of that information is there. So what this book tells you, it gives you an understanding of the basic ingredients and explains it in language that feedback I've had, and you might reinforce it. The feedback I've had on numerous people, they like this book because it's easy to understand, it's well written, it's well laid out, it's easy to follow, and it's not technical. There is technical things in there, but it's not highly technical. It's what must you do to get the product is what we want to do. And that's what we've done in this book here. And this is an example of laminated pastry. Now, laminated pastry is puff pastry, or it can be a croissant dough. Croissant dough and pain au chocolat, it's very popular now, croissants. They're laminated doughs. In other words, it's a dough with fat, it's folded and laminated, and then one puts yeast inside, one doesn't use yeast. What's the difference? One needs different temperatures, etc., etc. But so we explain how that's done. And there's a lot of books around about laminated pastries as well today. And I've got some slides in them to show you that right now. So these are two types of doughs. There's a white dough and there's a coloured dough on the top of there. So he's made this is the helping hand. They've made the dough and they've put a small bit of dough on the top, which is coloured, and when they roll it and then fold it and then they put it up, and it has these different colours inside. And this is the example. This is a black one he's done, which is a white dough, and he's put some chocolate dough on the top, and he's got his pain au chocolat there. And this is the traditional pain au chocolat. This is the traditional Danish croissant. This is the flavour of the month everywhere now. Those sopan salted bread rolls. Again, it's a different bread process. These are some examples of the products that they make up in the helping hand. They make all the bread for the residents every day. That's a 500 gram loaf. This is some food getting ready for an open house a few months ago now. There's fruit pies, lemon pies. This is almond pie with pears and things like that in there. And you can go to the helping hand if you're interested in doing that. Go to the helping hand Monday to Saturday, and you can have coffee and eat pastries there. These are products, again, of the helping hand, and these are products that come from the book. This is a shortbread tart. This is a yeast-raised dough for making across buns. These ones I've made at home. All of these are done in my kitchen at home, and following the recipe in the book, right? Now, in this book, there's a chapter in this book on how to set up a bakery. how to set an oven up. I mean, I can't show you that. I mean, most ovens today are fan-forced ovens, and they've got all these diagrams on them, and which is a fan, and the black line illustrates the top element or bottom element. So what do they mean? In this book, I've explained what they are, what they mean. For instance, when I made some cookies this morning for you to taste. I baked those on a fan and a bottom heat. So I didn't want a lot of colour on the top. I put the attachment, the fan and the bottom heat, which is this one here. If I wanted, and halfway through baking, I took the fan off, took the bottom off, and I put the top element on, so as I can get brown. So in this book here, it explains how you set an oven up. Before you go to bake something, you need to make sure that the oven is ready to take the product. You don't make something and suddenly realise, because an oven's going to take an hour or half an hour to warm up. I'll just go back. I mean, in this machine, I've got every page in this book. So I'm just going to quickly go through. I didn't do that. I wanted to. I can't. I'll just use this as an example. So in the first section is ingredients. The second section is how to set up a bakery. And if you're going to make bakery products, you need to read the recipe before you go and make the recipe. You need to understand what they're asking you to do, and then you need to keep records of what you're doing. So when you make something, you write it down. The senses in the bakery are, you need to watch what goes on, listen to what goes on, and feel. They're the three senses that a baker uses, apart from smell and taste. But I can be in a bakery and I can hear a machine doing something that it shouldn't be doing. Hey, there's something wrong with the machine. Or bread dough is ready. How do you know? Well, the machine's telling me the dough is ready. It's making a sound, flop, 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 flop. You learn these sort of senses in there. So the idea is that you keep track of, you keep records of what you want to do. If you're going to make cake, there are many different ways to make cakes. There's the creaming method, the all-in method, the chiffon method, the hot water method. There's a whole lot of them, and they all make good cakes, right? But they're different. The different techniques to use in there. But what you need to understand is, you're going to make cake, more than likely you've got to precondition some ingredients. In cake making, you need to precondition the butter or the fat. It needs to be at room temperature, not 30 degrees, but at room temperature, soft enough, so that when you mix it up in a machine, it can trap air in it. If it's not at the right temperature when you mix it up on the machine, you won't entrap enough air. An example, I was in KL one time doing a talk for US Potato Board, and I was working in this Taylor's University's kitchen, and the lady was getting ready to run, the chef was getting ready to run a class in the morning, and she got the butter out of the fridge, put it on the student's table, and when she got it out of the fridge, the butter was like a brick. And the students came in and she said, well, you've got to cream the butter and sugar together. And I thought, well, this would be interesting, how are you going to cream this? So they got a whisk, and when they tried to put the whisk into the butter, they couldn't move the butter. The butter was too hard. So there are techniques of preconditioning. You need to precondition ingredients. I distracted here. So I'll just stay focused on this one. You need to precondition ingredients. You need to understand that if you're going to do something, you need to plan what you're going to do, and then you keep notes of what picture. And today you can take pictures, right? Take pictures of what you do, and you might think, "Oh, it's beautiful today," and you do the same thing tomorrow, and it's a disaster. It happens to me as well, even though I've been doing it all the time. Why is that? Why one day it's good and one day it's not? Any idea? What could be the cause of that? Well, you might be not feeling too well today. You could be tired. You might be, your personality plays out in what you make, right? So you're not switched on every minute. Sometimes you switch off, and if you don't pay attention, and I've used to mention the term I use throughout all this is attention to detail. You need to pay attention to detail about what you're doing, right? Because the devil is in the detail. If you don't pre-condition the ingredients, they won't be soup. If you're going to make bread here in Singapore, I would suggest you put the fridge in the water that you're going to use for making the bread. You put it in the chiller overnight. So when you come to make the bread in your kitchen, it's around about 4 or 5 degrees Celsius. It'll quickly get warmed up when you put it in the mixer and you mix it up. But if you take it from the tap, it's 23 degrees Celsius at least. And if you start to make a dough with warm water, with 23 degrees Celsius, finished dough temperature will be 29, 30, 32. That means the yeast is going to start moving, right? So you need to control the temperature. We control the temperature by using cold water. And then in this book here, we've shown you how to ascertain how long I need to mix. How many of you have made a cake recipe from a recipe book, and you've looked at the cake, you've made the cake, and when it comes out of the oven, it doesn't look anything like this. It doesn't rise up as big. Anyone had that problem? That's a big problem, because you don't know what sort of machine, whoever did the recipe, what machine they used, what fats they used, what mixing machines they used, or what flour they used, right? So there's a tool called specific gravity, SG. You can measure the amount of air in your batter. Okay, so every mixing machine that you have is different. You might buy 2 KitchenAid machines. They look exactly the same, but when you put them together, one might have revolutions slightly more than the other. They still work, but one might reach peak mixing time quicker than this one. Okay, and the recipe says mix it on medium speed for 5 minutes. So how do you know when 5 minutes is good enough? So you can measure that by you can measure the weight of the batter and measure the amount of air in there, and if you're going to make a cake, an all-eat cake, it's about 0.73. The density of water is 1, so this is lighter than water. 0.73. So you can set your mixing times, and then you start to set your own parameters, and you get consistently quality good products. That's what you can do. And all of those information are sort of outlined in this book here. And then the practical section talks about bread making, sandwich bread, sweet buns, tarchon method, the latest fashionable type now, the tarchon method or the udani method of adding softness to our doughs by pre-gelatinizing some of the starch. Pre-gelatinizing some of the starch with either cooking flour over the stove or adding flour and boiling water together and making a dough and using it the next day. You'd be surprised how much softer that makes your product. We talk about that in here. Laminated pastries, we talk about laminated pastries, puff pastry and croissant type yeast raised doughs. Yeast raised doughs must be made in very, very tight conditions, temperature wise, low temperatures, cool environment, otherwise, and you use butter for this particular product, otherwise you can't handle it. Whereas with puff pastry, it still requires a lot of attention. It doesn't require the same attention if you're going to make a croissant. And we explain how that's done and that sort of stuff in here. There's a whole section on cookies, different types of cookies. Cookies, drop cookies, wire cut cookies, pipe cookies, many of the sort of things that you find in the marketplace around Chinese New Year time. There's a section on eclairs, choux pastry. Now, choux pastry is one of my favourite items. is my favourite item, actually, choux pastry. But very seldom can you get any decent choux pastry in Singapore. Singapore choux pastry, generally speaking, is woeful. It's soft and chewy and rubbery. A good eclair, you should be able to bite into it, and it's crispy because you dried it out in the oven and you put a nice custard filling inside it. So we tell you how to make that and different changes you can do to do that. There's a bakery in Singapore called La Eclair, and they've got one outlet in Singapore Shopping Centre in Clemenceau Road, and they've got another one up in Changi Airport in the Jewel called La Eclair. And you can see they do a very, very nice array of different eclairs, and they're charging around about $6 and $8 each. And when I first saw this type of work, first time I saw this work was in Thailand, in Emporium Shopping Centre up there. They were doing some of that work. They're the only people in Singapore that do those. And I was in Paris on a holiday one time, and Fouchon, they were €8 for a chocolate eclair, no bigger than that. And in the hotel we were staying at, there was a boulangerie down below, and we could get one from them for €3, which was quite good. But it tells you how to do that, and a lot of things with baking, it's how you bake it, the temperature that you set the oven, what the baking temperature is, and the time. For instance, when you glaze product with egg wash, what do you use? Do you use whole egg? If you're going to make mooncakes, anyone make mooncakes? In mooncakes, you use egg yolk, right? Because you want very high brown colour. But if you use egg yolks on pastry, puff pastry, and a chicken pie, before it's baked, the top will be black because it burns quickly. So and again, we suggest to you use 1 egg and 25 grams of milk, mix that together, and use that as egg wash, egg glaze, and that's a very soft, gentle. You'll get nice colour, and it won't burn black. And that's it. There's a section in there on healthy baking, gluten-free. Anybody eat gluten-free cakes, gluten-free bread? No? Like, gluten-free it's becoming more and more popular. I've just been in Switzerland to a wedding for one of my youngest daughter's wedding in Switzerland, and my Australian daughter and a friend were with us as well, and they're vegans and they're gluten-free. So wherever you go in Switzerland, we're always looking for gluten-free, and it's very high. There's a high rate of that consumed. There's a lot of gluten-free product here in Singapore, not as much as there would be in Australia. In Australia, there's a lot of gluten-free product around, but gluten-free is becoming more a health product. You're not gluten. You're not a celiac. A celiac is somebody who's gluten intolerant. A celiac, and it gives you bloated tummies and things like that. But there's a section there on healthy baking, and there's a recipe to how you mix rice, white rice flour, tapioca flour, potato starch, mix it together, and you make gluten-free bread, cakes, cookies. You can use this flour to substitute for bread flour, and you make it that way. So we've tried to give a lot of interesting people. There's keto, which is keto is low carbohydrate and that sort of stuff. That's becoming popular, and in the future you're going to see a lot of food that's protein increased. I mean, I've seen in the supermarket yogurt, protein increased yogurt. When I look at the ingredient label, I can't really understand what they've used for that. But protein, a lot of people want more. They think more protein is good for you. So more protein is going to be around in bread. And sourdough bread is healthy, supposedly more healthy for you than white bread because of the long fermentation time. The long fermentation time breaks down some of the gluten enzymes that are in the normal bread that don't interact with your stomach. They're more basic for your stomach, so you can do that. So that's all of the information that's in that book there, and all the recipes are done in groups. I just set up as group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, whatever. And the way it's set up like that is that's how you'd weigh up the recipe, and that's how you'd make the recipe as well. So there's a methodology in that. You just don't iggly-piggly do it. Then you make mistakes. So you follow this sort of stuff, and the method will follow that down there. And in a lot of the cases, there's a section in there called "You Must Know." I've used the term "must know" there. You must know that if you're going to make cake, you've got to precondition ingredients. You must know that if you're going to make bread, you've got to control the dough temperature, the finished dough temperature. You've got to control the final proving temperature. You must know that sort of stuff. It's not just, oh, I'll leave it there. You might read in a book, make this loaf of bread, let it double in size. Well, it might double in size in 20 minutes. It might double in size in 5 hours. Right? If you don't have the temperature right, you don't need to know, you won't be able to do that. And if you're interested in baking, that sort of information will be in there. And I mean, that's just a slide about me there. What I try to do in these books is, information is no good to me if I die with it. It's no use to me. Information is only good if you share it. And if you want to learn how to make baking, I want to tell you what you need to know, and you're going to have to make it yourself. I'm not going to make it for you. You're going to make it yourself. But you need to have the information. I believe you need to have the information. What you need to know, what you must know, you need to have that information before you start. Otherwise, you're not going to succeed. And baking is not about setting you up to fail. The idea of these books is to set you up to succeed. You want consistent quality. There's a young lady who on TikTok, she's had 30 little videos, and she started up making this pan so pan. She started teaching herself how to make that. She said, and she started off making with cake flour, and she couldn't understand that the dough was very soft. Well, of course, the cake flour can't take water, right? So she had to learn that, and she documented all of the learning process all the time. But I mean, I said to her, look, if you want to read this book, you'll find you can cut this information in half because that's explained there. We talk about bread here, and we talk about the bread making process. And I'll finish on that. This bread is about, as I said, flour quality. What's flour quality? Flour quality, a lot of bakers think the higher the gluten, the better the flour. Gluten is the elastic stuff that's inside there, right? Now, if I've got a 14% gluten flour, it'll be better than 11% gluten flour. But not necessarily so, because what gluten quantity can't tell you is what the gluten quality is. In other words, is the 14% gluten able to mix up in your mixing machine in the mixing time that you've done, or you've got to do something else to it, or can it hold enough water, that sort of stuff. So that's what flour quality is. Water absorption. How much water do you need to put in the dough, in bread dough now? The average, most bread flours will take a minimum of 62% water, and they can take up to 100% water, and anywhere in between. But you would start, if you're going to learn how to make bread, sourdough, you might want to go, you wouldn't go many much past 70% water. Don't go to 80 or 85% because the recipe, you won't be able to handle that dough. It'll be a mess for you. You get turned off very quickly, right? So, and the dough development. How do you develop the dough? You might have read that you do a gluten test. You pick a ball of, think of gluten like chewing gum. When you chew chewing gum, if you can remember, those of you can remember to chew chewing gum. When you used to buy chewing gum, when you first chewed gum, what was it like? It was very short, right? It was chewing gum that was coated with sugar. You broke it up, chew, and eventually you dissolve the sugar, and eventually it gets a bit, then you can blow above it. Right? And gluten is a bit like that. The more you mix it, the more you develop it, the more stretched it can be. All right, so I'll move to here, and then you can have something to eat. these are the sort of places that I've worked with. Tech, as I mentioned before, Californian Raisins, they're about to run another workshop up in Thailand next week, I see. Creative Culinaire, that's down at Tiong Bahru Plaza. Tiong Bahru, Judy Co runs that bakery there. If you want to learn how to make bakery and you want technical aspects, that's the place I'd recommend you go to. This is the ingredient company here. They're all over the world. That's a Norwegian company originally, but they're everywhere. Martin Braun, McDonald's, Artisan Bread. There's a yeast company, ARB International, Red Man. Many places that are there. And the Australian Society of Baking, TGR Food, the TGR, the Popular Skin Man, we've done a lot of work for him over the years in different things as well. Sarah Lee. So, if you need, what can the Baking Whisperer, which is me, I suppose, can offer you is this. If you're interested in this place, I do workshops or classes. We can do workshop or classes at a facility, or I've got a new house and I can run small little programs into my new house. If you're interested in something, educational programs, designing curriculum, we're going on a mission trip in a few weeks' time, in a few months' time, to Cambodia, to Laos, and the church I'm with, the mission, somebody set up a home there, and there's a vocational institute, and I'm going to sort of touch base with those to see whether we can help them in one way we can do it. So I do R&D work for products, initiate recipe creation, staff training. The biggest problem, as I see it in the industry, is that the bosses are reluctant to train staff. They don't think they need to have trained staff. They go off and do a course somewhere and get the knowledge and come back and translate it to the staff. That doesn't work. The ideal work, you can do a workshop, and it's a better way to do that. So staff training becomes important. So they're the sort of things that I can offer you. If you're interested in that, you can contact me on there. Sorry, I said Chinese and Mandarin. I mean, I'm approachable, easy to get along with. I'm not a prima donna. If you want any help, I'm interested to help you. And
the last one. And leave it there.
oh, no, I had a slide on mine. A thank you slide. Okay, can I let me just close this one. And I'll give this in one. I just want one. Okay, there was a couple of slides that I had. I'll just quickly go through these. That's for the book. I mean, I did this we swapped the slides over this morning. So there's part 3, which is process and recipes, and this is choux pastry, gatos and honoré, Paris breast, things like that. That information on the other side there is about laminated pastry, how you fold the pastry, how many turns you put in the pastry, because some need 3, some need 6, some need other. That's in chapter 3. And that's what I want to get on as well. So I mean, I'm sometimes known as the baking whisperer. I don't know. But there's a website called thebakingwhisperer.com, which has got more information on that sort of stuff. So that's what That's what you have. So any questions? Because I've got some brownies and some shortbread tarts if you try. Any questions?
好，question go biscuit。你可以感觉他很投入在他的做面包。
Yeah, I mean, you any you don't be shy. I mean, you ask a question. You got any questions?
Best opportunity 最好的时候可以问他。
From your experience of introducing bread making to Suzhou during that time, how was the recipient or acceptance level?
Well, there wasn't much Western style food there, and the idea was to introduce that.
Okay.
Right. Subsequently, there's every man and his dog is there now, and the Western pastries with an Asian slant are very popular. Right? I mean, I eat sliced. I mean, we used to work with a company. There was a company in Beijing and Shanghai called Manhattan Bakery. They were the only. They were the biggest and the first and the biggest industrial bread maker in Shanghai and Beijing, and they had a big factory. We used to work. Used to make bread for KFC as well. So it's acceptable. And I was somewhat of a novelty in Suzhou. I used to stay in a hotel near a very famous garden. I forget the names in the book there. And when I'd walk up to the factory and back from the factory, a lot of little kids would stop me and say hello and point to me because they'd probably never seen anyone with red hair before. Right? And it was a great educational thing. And they interested. They're interested to learn. Interested to learn that. And now, in the baking business, I mean, they have bread china, and it's a big time.
Because I thought during that time, the foreigner population was still small, and then the Chinese way of eating bread is very different.
Oh,
They eat mantou.
Yeah.
So
it still is. I still prefer. Most people like to eat noodles rather than bread and something like that. But it's gaining. It was we're in infancy there, and it's gaining popularity. It's certainly gained popularity now, particularly cakes and stuff like that.
You have so many students around Asian countries.
Yeah.
So I feel that the students have some different or same.
Well, if in Korea, there's a strong French influence in Korea, and also in Japan as well. The French first came out, I think, French bakers. In Korea, there's a lot of French influence there. In Myanmar, it was more Western style stuff. But they're making their own products, and we were trying to educate them to try something different. And I was in Korea. I worked in a bakery there called Samlip, which is tied up with Paris Baguette as well now. And that was a 4-story factory, size of 2 football fields, and we had where the goods were made on the first 2 floors. Third floor was the warehouse. All the goods came into the warehouse, and on the ground floor they came out packaged, ready and put in a truck to go off to the store. I've never seen, like it. I mean, whatever people eat in that country, it's okay. And perhaps a better example would be when I first came here, people wouldn't know what I was doing, Caucasians. I said, why can't you teach these people to make good bread? I said, well, what's on the bread here? Oh, I said, it's not German bread. I think he's German, right? It's not like my bread in Germany. I said, well, you're not in Germany now, you're in Singapore. And you're eating bread that Singaporeans like. Oh. So if you want German bread, you go to, I think it was Werner's Baking House up on the East Coast. Back in, I don't know where, anybody remember that? There was a bakery up in the East Coast near, where's the East Coast?
West Coast.
East Coast.
East Coast.
East Coast. Werner, he was a European, and he did a lot of stuff. I used to, we didn't make bread much. When I went bread on the weekends, I used to go to the Equatorial, what's the hotel down opposite Tangland Mall now? There was a hotel there. Marco Polo.
Tangland Mall, the expensive.
There was a hotel there on the corner, and
Used to be an Apollo Hotel, but not.
yeah, well that's right. Westerners used to go there and get that sort of bread. So it's I mean whatever people make and they eat is good. Basically.
你的 question， 你的问题是，他在全世界他走的时候，你说学生的感
对
觉
这样多学生，一些学生有什么他觉得有不一样的地方？
啊，对。So actually, what's the question is that when you teaching around the whole Asia or whatever, how is the student respond? 他的不一样，什么不一样，对不对？What's the difference of different? Example, you train in Singapore, you train in China.
Well,
how the students?
Well, generally the students are interested. If they're interested, if you make it interesting, they'll learn. Right? I mean, I'll give you an example, and I think I'll make it. I mean, at KDU, I mean, Malaysia, I used to go up there. They were culinary arts students, and I would do a bakery course with them. And I would get feedback like, "Oh, I didn't think baking was so interesting," or "I didn't know you could do this," because the people who were teaching them didn't have any knowledge of what they were doing. So all of us, my experience is anyone who wants to learn can learn. There's no better or worse. I mean, one of my better students was a Taiwanese fellow who came from Taiwan, came to Singapore, did our diploma. He's now working as a pastry, head executive pastry chef in Thailand, in a hotel, I forget what hotel. Sidel, the lady that runs Sidel, there's a comment on that, I saw that there. But she worked for Procter & Gamble, fast-moving consumer items. She used to bake cakes at home. People used to say to her, "Why don't you start up a cake shop?" So she came and did courses with us at BITC, and then she went and worked for Simply Bread part-time, full-time. She didn't tell them. She went to work for there on the pretext that she wanted to learn how to make bread. She just wanted to see what the woman was doing. So then she eventually started to bake her own. So my experience is, the majority of students want to learn, and if you make an environment where you give them information and they see value, they will learn. I mean, nobody's accosted me. I mean, in the early days, my teaching career in Sydney, sometimes the students used to exacerbate me. And one particular, I can remember this, one particular bloke, I forget what his name was, and he was doing something, and I said to him, "I think this dough needs a little bit more water. Get a bit more water." So he went away to the tap. He came down and poured water, and I just hit his hand and splashed the water. I said, "That's not how you get water." Now, in today's age, I might have been accosted for assault or something like that. But even him, I forget what his name was, I was able to, the most difficult student, I could get at least a smile out of them, and eventually, after you've been with them long enough and they understand what you're trying to do, they'll come close to you, no problem. I don't have any problem. And some I've had friendships for 40 years, students way back in Australia, in different places like that. And it was interesting just to read some testimonials in there this morning. I forgot about some of those. And when I'm working with those helping hand guys, the two fellows there now, they're prisoners on serving out the end of their time in a controlled environment. And both of them, well, there was three of them there. Of the three, two of them had done some culinary arts courses, and they were very good. Now, one fell off the wagon, he's back in prison, but the other two are still there. And that photograph of the emanated dough, that's Kelvin's. He's very keen on what he wants to do. And, every time I go there, I go there next Monday, I think, I won't say I've met with open arms, but they're always pleased to see me and show me what they're doing. And my experience is, if you encourage people, you get the best out of them. I mean, I'm not Asian, right? I'm Australian, Western, and you don't put down before you bring up. You bring up before you put down. You know, I mean, I often have discussion with my wife and with her children's children. The way they parent is very different to my style, and even different to hers. But one of their sons is going to go off to JB next week to a school. And I said, why doesn't, and the mother's going to have to drive him there and drive him back. Right? I said, why doesn't he go on the bus? Well, couldn't go on the bus, too long. You know, but in Sydney, for instance, there was an article in the paper I read a few weeks ago. Kids might travel 2 hours in the morning from their home to get to the school, which doesn't start at 7 o'clock. It'll start at 8:20. Right? So they've got to go. So people do that. So I mean, if you give something out, and I believe teaching is like that. Teaching it to me is a bit like being an actor. You've got to give something to get something in return. And I think there's a saying in that book, and it's taken in this book. It's been given to me by my grandmother, who lived to be 100 years and 6 months old. She said to me, Michael, life is like a bank account. You can't put anything in, you don't take anything. You won't. If you don't put anything in, you won't take anything out. So unless you give, you're not going to receive. And then she said to me, the other saying was, you've got to be interested to be interesting. Think of that. You've got to be interested to be interesting. And I just used that phrase, I don't know where it was, just recently, and somebody, you know, they picked up on that, right? Because if you're interested in people, you can get out of people, right? Teaching is not a fight. I got an example. When I went back to East Sydney Technical College, where I was an apprentice years ago as the head of the department, a fellow said to me, so-and-so in third year class, this man is a very difficult student. Always a difficult student. I said, okay. So I had him for 1 year. I didn't have any problems with him. I didn't find him a difficult student. I found what he liked. He liked football, and he not football like you know football, rugby league, which is a different sort of football, like rugby. He's a rugby supporter, and he followed a team called Manly, which is a beachside suburb of Sydney. And I was a football supporter, and I followed the Magpies, which are in Sydney. And I reached him on our mutual understanding of football, and I never had any problem with that fella at all. And all he wanted was basically what students want is a little bit of attention. It doesn't sound like a parent again, I don't know. But a little bit of attention, that's and you get the best out of it.
那时候学生也有从囚犯到最高级，所以因为他有时就是帮忙那些囚犯人家哈会好的，所以因为那种训练真的不容易，因为我在场，所以我了解，所以成功率挺不错的，他们挺
Yeah, I mean the other thing is, I mean I didn't put it here, but I've had a couple of there's a lady in the Philippines, Christina Bauer, has done 2 reviews. She's done a review on this book, and she's done a review on this book. And when she had this book, she got the review, and it was very, very positive stuff. No, not in there. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll send her this book, and she'll write a review on this. So I sent this book to her, and it came back, and I found out who she was. She's a bakery lecturer. I didn't know before. She was a bakery lecturer in Manila, in the university. And she said, the things she said in there were warmed my heart, in that she said, you know, that this book is about learning how to bake. And it's written in such a way that's easy to understand, at a level that people understand, and you must have. And she also made similar, I mean, I suppose I should put that on the website, I know. But it's so I finish up now. I work on my grandmother's. You've got to be interested to be interesting, and life is like a bank account. You put nothing in, you take nothing out. So, so I thank you for your time.
I'd like to ask one more
Yep.
question. For don't mixing, right?
Don't mix it.
Yeah, do you have any like
Okay.
all the things you do for
Don't mix it. All right, I'm using a Omni Haleo Pro. An Omni Halo Pro mixer. It's a spiral mixer with a starting. There's two. There's a junior version. The Halo Pro. It sells at about $1,200, $1,300, which is the same price, similar price to a KitchenAid, and it's better for dough making. It's I've got thousands of photographs in here. That's the one I would buy, and it sits on the kitchen bench. Should have this. That's the
not big things?
Well, this is worthwhile buying. It's not expensive. You could try. You can try cooking an apple.
Yeah, how the cookie then right now. Okay, everyone， 各位 ，so 出到现在，我去试试他的 cookie 好吗？啊，大家鼓励掌声一下。I think they will like to try the best.
Yeah. Well,
the cookie is the real started one, right?
so that's it. Mixing.